Star Trek: The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Starfall. Chapter 1. Jean-Luc Picard was a failure. He knew that at the very moment his computer screen blanked, with the time up heading flashing at him in angry red. Around him, hopeful students sighed, groaned, or muttered. He did not dare look up. He felt his cheeks burn hot with shame. Around him in the large San Francisco testing center, candidates had begun to converse nervously about their chances. He did not want to hear them. He switched off the power to his computer, got up, and went into the hall. He was high up, on the top floor of the 15-story Starfleet Records and Testing Building. The window looked out across the bay to a gleaming complex of white buildings shining in the morning sun. Starfleet Academy. Jean-Luc balled his fists in frustration. This was as close as he would ever get. Someone stuck his head out the door of the testing room and called, "Hey you, results are coming up." Jean-Luc closed his eyes and took a deep breath. If only his mind had not been so preoccupied with what his father would say. If only he had gotten a decent night's sleep instead of staying awake, trying desperately to cram a little more mathematics into his weary brain. If only, "Are you coming?" He grunted and turned. The big screen in the front of the testing room had come alive, showing the candidates' identification numbers and scores. A red line near the top of the list separated those who had passed the test and had qualified to go on to the next from the ones who had failed. The ones like Jean-Luc. His number glowed from just below the red line. So close, and yet he had not made it. He felt like hitting someone, preferably himself. Ow! Stop hitting yourself. Ow! Stop hitting yourself. But the lucky ones who had passed were cheering and shaking hands. He forced a smile on his face, a smile that felt ghastly and mask-like, and he extended his hand to congratulate a delirious young woman who had come in third. Inside, though, he was thinking already of the humiliating trip back to France, back to the vineyard, back to the open scorn of a father who despised modern machinery, a father who, from the bottom of his soul, loathed Starfleet and all it stood for. Jean-Luc did not know what he would say, what he would do when he returned home tomorrow. He felt a rush of excuses. He was tired, he was worried, now face it, he was purely and simply a failure. Ah oui, bien sûr. Long before Jean-Luc could see the vineyard, he could smell the young grapes. The fruity aroma was familiar to him, for he had spent all 17 years of his life on his father's vineyard outside the village of Le Bar in France. Once he had liked the sweet, sharp scent, but on this hot summer day it almost made him sick. His thoughts remained back in San Francisco, where he had spent 3 grinding days of testing. His stomach still felt twisted and painful, and the bitter taste of failure was still strong in his mouth. The young man walked slowly, his thick brown hair lank with sweat. He wasn't bald yet. In his mind, he relived the testing period that had made all the difference. Starfleet admission standards were high, and of course the tests were difficult, and yet, "I shouldn't have failed," Jean-Luc told himself in a voice of quiet fury. "I can do better. I can do better." His heart beat faster with a humiliating memory. He scored second on most of the tests, third on a few others, before the humiliation of the advanced mathematics test and his horrible showing. Just afterward, before the candidates received appointments for the big stress test, the psychological exam that everyone dreaded, a kindly officer took him aside to tell him that his scores were just a shade too low. Don't feel bad, the officer had said with an encouraging smile. You're only 17. Wait a year. Try again. You'll be surprised at how much more you'll know then. Jean-Luc clenched his teeth as he remembered the man's bland attempt to comfort him. Wait a year. Impossible. True, the man had no way of knowing that Jean-Luc had barely won permission from his father to try just this once, but still, something bounced off Jean-Luc's head, something thrown accurately but not so hard that it hurt. He spun around, raising his fists in anger. So you're not one of the walking dead after all? So, how should I do this voice? So you're not one of the walking dead after all, came the teasing voice of his older brother, Robert. Robert! He was sitting cross-legged atop a stone wall. He hopped down and strode toward Jean-Luc. Oh, you're not going to hit me. Remember, Jean-Luc, you weren't the only one to win a medal for wrestling. Playfully, Robert lunged at him. Jean-Luc bounced back a step, dropped into a defensive crouch. He set his face in a stern mask of challenge. Come and try me, Robert! Robert! He growled, his voice almost a snarl. Robert raised his hands and grinned. No, thank you very much. He rolled his eyes heavenward and heaved a deep sigh. This is the thanks I get for being a considerate brother, no? Huh? I knew you'd be plodding back home, weary with disappointment, and I came to cheer you up. By throwing rocks at me? Demanded Jean-Luc. With a smirk, Robert held up something that looked a little like a little gray ball. It was a small mushroom. Here's your rock, he said. I picked these out of the moss behind the wall as you came trudging along with with your head down and your gaze in the dirt. Did the great hard mushroom raise a lump? Petit, mon frère? Jean-Luc snorted and strode away. He heard Robert's hurrying footsteps behind him, and a moment later he felt his brother's hand on his shoulder. Je suis désolé, Robert said, and he sounded sincere. When you called, I could tell how disappointed you were. For what it's worth, Jean-Luc, I wish you were going to Starfleet Academy. It isn't fair, Jean-Luc said, his voice gruff. He was fighting the impulse to cry. I could do better. I know I could. If only... The hand on his shoulder gave him an encouraging pat. If only our father weren't so old-fashioned. If only you hadn't been worrying about how he would react to your passing the tests and leaving the vineyard. I know, Jean-Luc, I know. Je pense. After a few seconds of silence, Jean-Luc said, It isn't that I don't love father. I know that, too, petit mon frère, but you will admit he can make himself a hard man to love. Ah, voilà, the new section. The Picard vineyard covered many hectares, a countryside of rolling hillsides and thickly planted grape fields separated by rows of ancient oaks. The new section had been prepared for planting only the previous fall. Jean-Luc remembered the hours of back-straining labor to break the soil, to fertilize it, to prepare the land for the precious vines, all so senseless when machines could do in a few hours the work he, his father, his brother, and their helpers did in weeks of groaning, hard labor. But such shortcuts were not for Maurice Picard, their proud and domineering father. Jean-Luc often thought that Maurice would have been happier in ancient times, as a vintner in 15th century France, perhaps, or even the early 21st century. Maurice always insisted that the old ways were the best ways, and he made sure that every step of growing grapes was done the old way. Jean-Luc saw him now, a distant figure measuring the tilled hillside for the arbors he and the boys would build that fall. The vines would begin to grow next year, and in a few years' time, the new variety of Picard Rouge grape would yield its sweet juice. If everything had gone exactly right, if all the hard work paid off, the juice would become a world-famous wine, just like Picard Noir. If not, well, one could always rip out the vines, rework the field, and replace the grapes with yet another variety. So much left to chance, murmured Jean-Luc. He halted, gazing off at the hillside and at his distant father. Chance? asked Robert. Jean-Luc shrugged and turned to walk toward the chateau. Father hybridizes the grapes the old way. It would be so much easier to have a botanist genetically engineer a grape for whatever traits he wants. As it is, most of Father's experiments are failures. Ah oui, bien sûr, d'accord, the Picards and the failures, oui? Jean-Luc froze in his tracks. What did you say? I said to get over your moping. Robert snapped. You promised Father that if you failed to get into Starfleet Academy, you'd drop the subject. Live up to your promise. Jean-Luc did not answer. He stalked into the house, went straight to his room, and threw himself on his bed. His breath came painfully, and his throat ached from the effort not to sob. At last he sat up and looked around his familiar room. The ships and models that he had spent hours building seemed meaningless and childish to him. Don't throw them away, Jean-Luc. Even the carefully modeled Promelian battle cruiser, the pride of his collection, looked like a stupid toy. What good were models when he wanted the real thing? But his father would never consent to what Jean-Luc ached to ask him. There's always next year, the officer had told him, and it was true enough that with a little more study, a little more application, his scores could improve. He was almost sure that he could pass the test if he tried again next year, but he had promised his father. Jean-Luc remembered all too well how he had lost sleep before the first round of testing. He remembered, too, how satisfied Maurice had been when he had called home to confess his failure. Good, his father had said with an air of finality. I'm glad you have this Starfleet foolishness behind you. Now, if you want to attend to good agricultural college, I'd be happy to consider that. Though they'd fill your head with all sorts of nonsense about bioengineering and technology, well, spend a year or two on the vineyard, and then you'll know what you want to do. Wrong, father, thought Jean-Luc. I don't need a year or two. I know what I want to do now. I always knew. I want to go to Starfleet Academy. If only you would understand. Jean-Luc felt no better that evening when his mother called him and Robert to dinner. Yvette Picard's voice was musical and soft, and her manner was always elegant. Jean-Luc always thought that a woman like his mother should never have to worry about preparing meals, about cleaning a house. She should have replicators and machines to do all that. But Yvette loved Maurice and wanted to please him, and so every evening she prepared a meal the old-fashioned way, and Jean-Luc had to admit that it was always delicious. He slipped into his place at the table, à table, the place beside his brother, where he had sat ever since outgrowing his high chair. Robert was there already, as tall as Jean-Luc and a little heavier, a little more muscular. The two boys had the same dark brown hair and the same determined cast of chin, inheritances from their mother and father. Where else would they have come from? Maurice came in looking weary but happy. He settled into his place, the candlelight gleaming on his balding head. He murmured a brief grace. What? That's weird. And then Yvette brought the meal in from the kitchen. All my time in France, I never heard anybody say grace. Okay. It was hearty fare. Onion soup, thick with cheese, a green salad, coq au vin, the chicken replicated but the wine natural, and a delicate almond pastry for dessert. For a few moments they ate silently, and then Maurice looked up. Well, now that both of our boys are here again, I have a surprise for the family, he said, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. Some wonderful news! They looked at him expectantly, but Maurice was in no hurry to reveal his surprise. Jean-Luc, he said, I know that sometimes you don't hear me say this enough, but I am very proud of you, captain of your debate team, champion fencer, star marathon runner, valedictorian of your class. Son, I know how hard you have tried to please me. I'd like to please you as well, and I have been thinking over the question of how to do it very carefully. At last, something occurred to me. He took a sip of wine, the Picard Noir 2315, that was in contention for this year's Grand Prix du Soleil, an award given to the wine named the very best in the entire solar system. I hope it will show you how much your efforts mean to me. Jean-Luc's heart leaped. Did his father know that he wanted to test again for Starfleet Academy? Was he saying that he would give his consent? His mouth was dry with anticipation. Maurice set down his wine glass. I have agreed to buy the open lands to the east of the vineyards, he said. I've gone over them very carefully, and the soil is right for a white grape. We've never had a Picard Blanc, but I'm convinced we could produce an excellent one. We will increase the vineyard's size by nearly a third, and Jean-Luc, you will be in charge of all the new fields. Jean-Luc choked. Beside him, Robert pushed his chair back and stood. Father, his older brother said, anger hot in his voice, you never told me about this. Maurice's smile faded. The opportunity arose suddenly, he said, his voice cold. But we were to be partners, Robert said, his voice shrill with emotion. I have worked this vineyard since I was 10. And you've done a good job, Maurice said, a warning frown crossing his face. But you won't begrudge a little glory to your younger brother? Ha! Robert scowled at Jean-Luc. Begrudge a little glory? Father, when did he ever have anything but glory? He's the one you boast of, the one you pamper and spoil, and... I won't have this talk, said Maurice, rising to his feet. Yvette was standing too. No, stop, the two of you. S'il te plaît, she said. Jean-Luc could stand it no longer. He shouted, Quiet, everyone! They fell silent, looking at him in astonishment. Doesn't it occur to anyone that I might have a word to say about all this? Ah, the little mouse roars, said Robert bitterly. Yes, tell us, Jean-Luc, in your wisdom, what is the perfect solution to this family disagreement? Jean-Luc felt his face burning. He hated these scenes. First, he said, I didn't ask Father for any new lands. I'm not sure I want to be in charge of anything like that. At least not doing things your way, Father. Maurice looked puzzled. My way? The old-fashioned way, Jean-Luc said, his voice tired. I'm sorry, Father, but I don't want to... He took a deep breath. I don't want to be a farmer at all. I want to go to Starfleet Academy and... That's ridiculous, Maurice bellowed angrily. You ungrateful young fool, putain de merde! I'm not, Jean-Luc protested. I just want another chance. You'll get no other chances. Don't you know when you failed, you weren't cut out to go gallivanting around the stars? You have the vineyard. You have farming in your blood. What more do you want? I want what's right for me. I'll tell you what's right for you. The furious argument that followed sent Jean-Luc stalking to his room, back rigid, jaw clenched. He hurled himself onto his bed, his eyes burning, his throat painfully clenched against rising sobs. He told himself with fierce pride that he would not let himself cry. He fell asleep on the bed, fully clothed, and woke sometime late at night, aware that someone else was in the room. He began to sit up, but a cool hand pressed against his forehead. Quiet, quiet, his mother said. I did not mean to wake you. Jean-Luc lay back. His face seemed tight, and he could feel that tears had dried on his cheeks. Oh, maman, he said miserably. How will I ever live? You will find your own way, Yvette replied at once. Jean-Luc, tonight you surprised me. I know, he groaned. I honestly tried not to mention Starfleet, but... Oh, Starfleet, she said, dismissing the idea. No, you surprised me by how much you were like Robert and your father. Proud, strong, independent. Or to put it another way, pig-headed and stubborn. You've always been the quiet one, but I knew the Picard in you would come to the surface eventually. She leaned close and kissed him on the forehead. You get some sleep. I shouldn't have come in. What will I do? Jean-Luc asked as she rose from his bedside. Her voice came from the dark, firm and full of love. Why, Jean-Luc, you will do what you must do. That, too, is the Picard in you. The door opened and closed softly. Jean-Luc rose in the dark, changed his clothes, and opened the window. He stared out into a night full of brilliant starlight. He looked up at the stars for a long time, feeling a hopeless yearning. They were so far away. Between him and the stars lay the barriers of failure and a promise that he hated but must keep. The stars offered no help, just their cold, eternal, mocking light. At last, exhausted, he fell back into bed and into a deep sleep, dreaming himself onto the bridge of a starship. Chapter 2. The next day, Jean-Luc used their home terminal, one of the few modern conveniences that Maurice grudgingly allowed the household. He requested a copy of the mathematics examination, printed it, and took it to his room. Odd how easy some of the questions appeared now. Frowning, Jean-Luc went through them the old-fashioned way, with a pencil and paper. He saw small errors that he had made, errors of carelessness and of exhaustion. If he had the test to take over again, he knew that he could pass it. Over the next few weeks, he began to study, late at night, after the work on the farm had been done. Now that he had seen what the testing was like, he realized minor ways he had gone wrong. Without speaking to anyone about his project, Jean-Luc began to train himself, not the frantic last-minute cramming that had done him in, but a long, steady haul. It was like training for a race, done a little at a time. Although he had no plans to retest for Starfleet, somehow studying helped to ease his pain at failing and distracted him from the fact that half a planet away, Starfleet Academy was beginning a new year without him. Not that he neglected working on the vineyard. If anything, he plunged into that with even fiercer determination. Somehow, whenever he concentrated only on the farm chores that had to be done, He even pleased his father, for Jean-Luc was a hard worker, and he succeeded at everything he tried. Almost everything. At the bottom of his memory, like a bitter, rotten grape, was a sour memory of his biggest failure, practically his only failure. When he was working or studying, he rarely thought of it. When he was idle, the memory burned in him. So he tried running away from it. In high school, Jean-Luc had been a track star and a marathon runner. For a month or two after graduation, he fell out of training. But one morning in September, almost out of his mind with boredom, he put on his running shoes. That day, he did a hard 5 kilometers, running all out until he was ready to fall over from weariness. Even so, that night, like every night, he hit the books again, learning about Cochrane physics and temporal distortion, about inertia fields and astronavigation. As he was falling asleep, the thought came to him that the preparation had to be for something. He knew then that he was going to reapply for the academy. He suspected the rage that Maurice would show when he learned of his son's decision. Should he tell his father? No. He decided on the very edge of sleep. Right now they were all happy, or reasonably happy. There was no reason to spoil that by telling about his plans. Not yet anyway, not just yet. Beginning the next morning, he ran every day. All through winter, and now into a bright but cool May. Before reporting to the fields, he left the vineyard at dawn, ran all the way to La Barre, and now was almost back, pacing himself for the last long hill. Physically, he felt wonderful. If only his problems had been physical, he thought, he would have nothing to regret, nothing to complain about. He saw Robert sitting on the stone wall ahead and to his right, and he had a quick flash of déjà vu, that creepy feeling that he was reliving a moment. Then he remembered that this was the very place where Robert had greeted him last summer on his return from his testing. Robert hopped lightly off the wall and dropped into step beside Jean-Luc, loping along easily, although he was long out of practice as a runner. "I got my answer from father at last," Robert told Jean-Luc, pleasure in his voice. "He said oui at breakfast this morning." "Oh?" gasped Jean-Luc. "Then you're going off-world?" "To Alcalops Beta 2, Robert confirmed. "At the end of the summer, I'll spend a whole year there learning about their growing techniques." "Lucky for you, they don't use machinery." Jean-Luc was really too winded to talk, but he didn't want to show any weakness to his older brother. They came in sight of the chateau, and Jean-Luc slowed to a walk. He needed to cool down and to do his stretching exercises. Robert hadn't run far enough to trouble with that, but he walked alongside anyway. "Lucky for me you're so indispensable," he muttered, his voice now irritable. "Father doesn't need me at all with you around." "That isn't true," Jean-Luc snapped. "You can do everything I do. You even like it." "Tell him that," Robert said moodily. "I have," Jean-Luc almost added. "Soon. He'll have to do without both of us." But he had not yet applied for retesting, and he knew that speaking of it to Robert would be the same as telling Maurice. He kept quiet. For a few minutes they walked silently, and then Jean-Luc halted to stretch his leg muscles. He felt the old familiar glow that running always gave him, the feeling of health and ease. Robert leaned against a fence, arms crossed, staring at him. "Well," Jean-Luc said, "at last you get to do something you've wanted." Robert nodded, but did not smile. "That's true. You know, when I graduated from high school, Father promised that I could go to college anywhere I wanted. But first, he said, I had to work on the vineyard, because you were still in school and he couldn't be short-handed. Well, I waited for 3 years, and then you graduated. And now it's taken me most of another year to talk him into keeping his promise." "Alcaroups Beta 2 is a planet, not a college," Jean-Luc pointed out. He was doing toe touches, and his hair kept flopping into his eyes. He'd grown careless about keeping it trimmed. I know that, returned Robert, but it's an educational planet. Jean-Luc merely grunted. He knew that Alcalarips Beta 2 was a sparsely populated colony world, home to a human population of only 5 million. A very few Vulcans lived there too, in one small community, and a sprinkling of other aliens owned businesses in the larger towns. But the planet was almost entirely an agricultural paradise, growing quintotriticale, other grains, and a bewildering variety of fruits and vegetables, some native to the planet, others imported from Earth and elsewhere. The land masses of the planet, its distance from its sun, everything came together to make the world ideal for those who loved the land and the things it produced. Robert was right. He would learn lots of things from his year on Alcalarips Beta 2. I want you to know something, Robert said as Jean-Luc finished his exercises. This is something I've had my heart set on for a long time. Jean-Luc stared at his brother. The morning light was full in Robert's face, and with a shock Jean-Luc noticed that Robert's hair was thinning. His scalp glowed through the sparse hair at the crown of his head. The light and shadows on Robert's face made him look far older than 20, made him look a lot like Maurice. I know you've been waiting for the chance, Jean-Luc said. I wish you well, truly. Merci, mon petit frère, Robert said. He smiled, and the illusion of age dropped away. He was himself again, the big brother who had taught Jean-Luc how to swim, who had cheered him on in fencing matches and debate contests. I know you won't do anything to spoil my chance. Jean-Luc felt puzzled. What? Of course I won't. But what makes you think that I could spoil your chance? Father promised you that you could go. Robert gave him an ironic smile. Oui, he did. He could change his mind, though. If you should talk of leaving, I'd never get away then. Jean-Luc felt an icy shiver of premonition. What are you asking me to do, Robert? Robert looked away. To forget about Starfleet Academy, he said in a low voice. For this year, anyway. Jean-Luc bit his lip. He had said nothing about the academy for months, and he certainly had kept his studies a complete secret. Does it still show? He asked. What? That you want to be in Starfleet? You can't disguise that, Jean-Luc. Only wait a year. That's all I'm asking. Wait just one more year before you ask Father's permission to test again. A whole year! The 9 months since last summer seemed almost endless to Jean-Luc. How could he promise to wait for another year? He shook his head. I'm sorry, Robert. I know how much this means to you, but... Robert's face flushed red with anger. Sometimes I hate you, he snarled as he turned and strode off. Jean-Luc sighed. He loved his brother, but there were times when the two couldn't stand each other. Yet there were so many good times, so many long days in the vineyard, so many refreshing swims in the river, so much joking and laughter. It was all too confusing. He didn't know if... Jean-Luc! A familiar voice broke into his thoughts, made him look up sharply. Louis, of course, laughing. Husky Louis Blanchard, hopping out of his sleek silver air car. He had landed expertly, so quietly, that Jean-Luc hadn't even noticed his approach. Louis came bouncing over to him, energy, and every step a beaming smile on his face. What, running again? You should try it, Jean-Luc said, grinning at the overflowing good spirits of his best friend. You're going to get fat riding around in that machine all the time. Louis slapped his fat stomach. Me? Impossible! I am in better shape than ever! Louis had also been a runner in high school, though his specialty was sprints rather than distance running. That was typical of him. He had boundless energy for short bursts. He found it hard to stick with something like a long project or a marathon run. Hey, I've come to offer you the opportunity of a lifetime. Right now, the only opportunity I want is to shower and change clothes, Jean-Luc returned. But I'm in France, so I could skip the shower. Come on in, though. Have you had breakfast? Of course you have. You're always up at the dawn. Well, you can have a cup of chocolate while I eat, and then you can tell me about this wonderful opportunity. Jean-Luc hurried through his shower. It doesn't matter. I'm in France. His father was already out in the vineyard, had not taken a shower for 3 days, and he supposed that Robert was there too. He wouldn't be expected or needed for a while. The vines required little attention at this time of year. It would be later, with the autumn harvest, that the work would stretch into 12 and 14-hour days. He prepared himself a light breakfast, a croissant and a hot dark chocolate, and sat with Louis at the table. Now, he said, what's your news? Have you finally decided what your college major will be? Louis grinned. He was a dark-haired young man the same age as Jean-Luc, slightly shorter, slightly more heavily built. Now, he said, it isn't unusual for a student to spend his first year in general studies. I'm still casting about for my life's work. Louis had a wonderful mind, and he could have gone to, say, any university on or off Earth, but he settled for a year at the local campus of the European University. Unlike Jean-Luc, Louis had no clear idea what he wanted to be or study. He sipped his chocolate and said, I'm beginning to think that hydroponics is my field. Jean-Luc laughed. And last week, it was xenobiology, and the month before was linguistics. No, this time I'm serious, Louis insisted. Jean-Luc shook his head. Really, Louis, growing food without soil is incredibly important to colony worlds and to deep space stations, but isn't it rather, well, boring? Ah, Louis retorted. You and your dirt-grubbing farm boy ways. Why, there are all sorts of challenges and opportunities in the field. Did you know that for the next 2 minutes, Louis lectured him on botany, growth coefficients, and ecology? At last, Jean-Luc raised his hands in mock surrender. Enough, he pleaded. Louis, that's all very well for you. But what about the opportunity you were going to give me? I haven't heard anything about that yet. Oh, Louis said. Right, sorry. Well, do you know what MedLab 1 is? Jean-Luc rolled his eyes. Would it happen to be an experimental undersea colony on the floor of the Mediterranean? He asked sarcastically. The place where scientists are studying ways to establish human colonies on worlds that are all ocean? Or is there some other MedLab 1 I haven't heard about? All right, said Louis. So you know about MedLab. I'll bet you didn't know this, though. It includes a self-contained university with degree-granting privileges and everything. Every summer, MedLab has orientation sessions for prospective students who want to learn more about their techniques and methods. And I've asked them to save 2 spots, beginning 2 weeks from Monday. 1 for you and 1 for me. What do you say to a week's Mediterranean vacation? Jean-Luc couldn't help himself. He burst into laughter. Louis looked hurt. So sorry, Louis, Jean-Luc gasped at last. I was just thinking of your skill at swimming, and it seems so funny that... He dissolved into laughter again. Louis sniffed. Some people don't take to the water, he observed. Jean-Luc wiped his eyes with his napkin. No, he said, they certainly don't. What did Coach Dietz compare your crawl stroke to? A hippopotamus with a stomachache, wasn't it? Louis, you can hardly swim. They have aqua tracks, Louis said. You don't need to swim. You just need to be able to use an air tank and to hang on to your aqua track. I'm sorry, Jean-Luc said with a grin. Look, how long did you say this trip will last? 1 week, Louis returned, his high spirits flooding back. He almost bounced in his chair. We get a complete tour of all the facilities and lots of time off. And Jean-Luc, about half the students touring are always girls. And you look so handsome in swimming trunks, Jean-Luc said. Well, I'd argue with you, but that happens to be true, responded Louis. Come on, Jean-Luc, go avec moi. Wouldn't you like to get away from here for a week? For more than that, thought Jean-Luc with a little stab of conscience. But then he considered the possibility. Perhaps this trip could be the excuse he'd been searching for. One didn't just transmit an application to test for Starfleet Academy. That had to be done in person. And while promising high school students always made the trip to San Francisco, there was also a smaller European testing center near Paris. That'd be much more discreet. If Louis had timed things a little better, Jean-Luc might even have gotten away with the actual testing with no one's being the wiser. However, we'll need to talk more about this later, but I'll ask, he said at last. He went in search of his mother and found her at the household computer terminal, shopping. Really? Most houses had more than one computer, more than one holophone. The old-fashioned Bar Maurice permitted just one of each, both of them in the little office off the kitchen. Yvette looked up and smiled as he came in. Good morning, she said. Jean-Luc, have we had quiche too often to consider it again? I can't decide how much cheese to order. Your quiche is always delicious, Maman, Jean-Luc said with a smile. There's never any left, is there? Well, that's true. She ordered the cheese and said, What's on your mind, Jean-Luc? Jean-Luc told her about Louis and his offer. She nodded and gave him an understanding look. I think that's a splendid idea. You worked hard, and you deserve some time off. Go ahead, Jean-Luc. I haven't asked Father, he said with some reluctance. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. He won't mind, she assured him. Tell Louis, of course he'll go. And while you're away, try to enjoy yourself. Jean-Luc kissed his mother on the cheek and went to tell Louis that he would go. Louis slapped him on the back and then hurried out to his air car. Jean-Luc saw him off, then stood there until the car was a gleaming silver dot racing off toward Le Bar. He hoped that the deceptions he was planning would work out all right. Louis would not be angry with him. Perhaps if he succeeded, neither would his father. With a bitter grin, Jean-Luc shook his head. No, nothing could save him from his father's anger.